One last command. The war dog who taught a soldier to stay. Grant. Mallory believed he'd buried the battlefield the day he folded his uniform for good, until a late-night phone call sent him chasing ghosts down bleak Texas highways. In a warehouse that smelled of bleach and betrayal, he found Asher. Ribs map-thin, eyes clouded, still waiting for the partner who'd promised never to leave. When Grant whispered the old German command, "Bleib," the impossible happened. Asher's tail lifted, a defiant ember against the dark. This video unspools the raw aftermath of that moment. How a viral photo ignited new laws, how one dog's heartbeat jump-started a movement, and why the word "stay" can rebuild lives long after the shooting stops. Listen close. The story might just ask you to stay too. The truck creaked as it rolled to a stop on the gravel path, a faint cloud of dust rising behind the rear wheels like breath from a tired beast. Grant Mallory killed the engine, but for a moment he didn't move. His fingers remained wrapped around the steering wheel, knuckles white, body hunched. The silence outside felt unfamiliar, not peaceful, but hollow, stretched too thin, like skin over bone. The wind sighed through the tall prairie grass that had crept back onto the once cleared drive. The front gate was missing 2 slats, paint peeled from the porch rails. The wooden sign that used to read Mallory Ranch now hung crooked, one chain rusted through. 8 years. 8 years since he'd last seen this place. 8 years since he stood on this soil. A boy trying to become a man in the shadow of his father's barn. He'd left with a buzz cut, new boots, and a laugh that came easy. He came back with a limp, a medical discharge, and a silence inside him no bullet ever caused. Grant stepped out of the truck. His boots hit the earth with a dull thud. A breeze blew dust over his legs and whispered through the nearby trees, like something forgotten trying to remember its name. He glanced at the house. 2 stories, once white, now gray with neglect. Curtains hung in the windows like ghosts. Every board groaned in the wind. The front steps creaked beneath his weight as he climbed them, and when he turned the key in the lock, it resisted. Just like everything else these days. The door opened with a wheeze. Inside, the air was thick and stale. Dust motes spun in the shafts of light cutting through broken blinds. Furniture sat covered in white sheets, like corpses tucked under linen. The house hadn't changed. That's what made it so hard. He walked slowly, each step stirring up memories he hadn't asked for. His mother humming in the kitchen, his father's boots by the door, the scratch of Asher's paws on the hardwood floor as the young shepherd ran to greet him. "Asher!" Grant paused in the center of the living room. He hadn't allowed himself to say the name out loud in months, not even in the dark. Saying it meant acknowledging the ache that sat in his chest like shrapnel. Saying it meant confronting the silence where barking used to be. He moved deeper into the house, passing the stairwell where Asher once slept curled at the base step, always waiting, always watching. A phantom weight followed him now, the ghost of paw steps that no longer echoed. Upstairs, the hallway smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old wood. His room was at the end, the only one not covered with dust sheets. He hadn't planned to stay here long, but there was nowhere else. The VA hospital hadn't offered much beyond prescriptions and a diagnosis. PTSD, chronic back trauma, survivor's guilt. He threw his duffel onto the mattress with a grunt. His body groaned under the effort. His back had never healed right. Too many years of humping packs, falling hard, taking hits and never stopping to mend. Marines didn't get to pause. You kept moving or you got left behind. Grant sat on the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floorboards. They were scratched from years of Asher chasing tennis balls. He reached into his bag, pulled out a bottle of painkillers, stared at it, then shoved it back in. A memory came, uninvited, vivid. He was 26 again, lying in a bomb crater in Anbar province, leg bleeding, dust choking his throat. Everything was fire and screaming until Asher appeared out of the smoke, eyes locked onto his, harness clanking, dragging him by his vest strap, inch by agonizing inch, away from the kill zone. Grant remembered gripping Asher's fur like it was the last real thing in the world. He stood abruptly. The air felt too tight. He needed to move, to see something familiar. He opened the hallway closet. The door creaked open, slow as breath. Inside, beneath a faded coat and an old pair of hiking boots, something hung on a metal hook, dusty, folded, but unmistakable. A vest, tan, canvas, stitched with fading black letters. M.W.D. Asher. His breath caught. The name hit like a bullet. He reached out with a trembling hand, lifted the vest into the light. Dust fell from it like ash. He turned it over in his hands, fingers tracing the edges of the tactical straps, the chew mark on the bottom hem. Asher had gnawed it the day Grant tried to teach him to stay, and ended up tackled in the dirt. For a moment, the ache gave way to warmth. Then the warmth turned to rage. Where was he? No one had answered that question. Not clearly. Not once. The last time Grant asked command, they said Asher had been transferred for reassignment or temporary training. That was months ago. No contact, no update, no closure. Grant clenched the vest in both hands, pressed it to his chest like a shield. His jaw locked. They told him Asher was just a dog. But he wasn't. Asher was a soldier, a brother. And somewhere out there, Grant believed, no, knew, Asher was still waiting. Alone. Forgotten. Not for long. Grant placed the vest carefully on the bed, like it was sacred. Then he turned and opened his laptop. If the war taught him anything, it was this: you never leave your partner behind. The porch groaned beneath Grant Mallory's weight as he lowered himself into the old rocking chair, the wood dry and brittle from too many seasons under sun and snow. The night air was cold for early autumn dry winds blowing off the prairie, slicing through the tall grass and carrying that haunting stillness only veterans recognize. The kind of stillness that didn't soothe, the kind that felt like something was about to go wrong. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat on the table beside him, the label peeling in the breeze. His fingers cradled the glass like muscle memory, thumb tracing the rim absently. He wasn't drinking to forget. He knew better. Forgetting wasn't possible. He was drinking because sometimes the silence pressed too close, and a burn down the throat was easier than what he really felt. The stars overhead were pin-sharp, sprawled across the sky like a map no one ever taught him how to read. Somewhere out there, men he'd bled beside were looking at the same sky. Maybe they were sleeping. Maybe they were drinking like him. Maybe they were dreaming of things they couldn't say out loud. But for Grant, sleep didn't come easy. Not here. Not anymore. The laptop glowed faint blue on his lap, illuminating his face in fragments. He scrolled with one hand, the other resting flat against his thigh, tapping a quiet rhythm that betrayed his anxiety. The screen was filled with names, dates, call signs, digital echoes of missions long past, recon briefings, debrief files, handler rosters, photos. He kept returning to the folder labeled MWD Asher Deployment, even though he'd opened it dozens of times before. Click. A photo loaded. Asher mid-leap over a stone wall in Al-Kut, ears flared, eyes locked forward, muscles taut with purpose. Click. Another. Grant crouched in desert camo beside Asher, one hand on the shepherd's shoulder, both of them caked in sand. They were smiling. Well, Grant was. Asher had that fixed, noble expression he always wore after a mission, like he knew he'd done well. Click. A close-up. Asher's amber eyes filling the frame, wind-blown fur, dust flecks clinging to his muzzle, eyes that didn't blink. Grant stared at that one for a long time. "You remember everything," he whispered into the dark. "Don't you, boy?" The porch creaked again, but it was just the wind. His thumb hovered over the trackpad. Then, with deliberate motion, he opened a new tab. The military handler registry hadn't changed much. Clunky interface, restricted filters, but he'd learned to navigate it like second nature. He typed in a name, Sergeant Miguel Lomas, Asher's last known interim handler after Grant's medical discharge. He hadn't spoken to Miguel since Kuwait, not directly. Last he heard, Lomas was reassigned to a base in California. The man was sharp, had a way with dogs. If anyone knew what happened to Asher after Grant left the Corps, it was him. He opened a secure messaging portal through a private veteran network. Typed slow. "Hey, Lomas, it's Grant Mallory. I know it's been a while. I'm back stateside. I'm trying to find out what happened to Asher. Command's giving me the runaround. Thought maybe you knew where he ended up. Hope you're well. G." He stared at the message, then hit send. The delivered checkmark appeared instantly, but nothing after that. No typing dots, no reply. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that felt like abandonment. He leaned back in the chair and exhaled through his nose. The whiskey in his glass was gone. He didn't remember drinking it. Crickets chirped in the distance, but even they sounded tired. From the fields beyond, a coyote howled once, long and thin, like a cut across the sky. Then silence swallowed it whole. The wind changed direction. The house behind him creaked, as if remembering something it hadn't said in years. Grant rubbed his eyes with the heel of his palm. He knew that silence. He'd heard it between firefights, when radios went dead and heartbeats got too loud. It was the kind of silence that meant you were alone, and worse, that no one was coming. He stood slowly, joints popping in protest, and walked down the 3 porch steps barefoot. The dirt was cold under his soles. He walked toward the barn, guided only by muscle memory. The moonlight caught on something rusted near the fence, an old chain dangling from a post. It used to hold Asher's training dummy, the one they used to simulate combat extractions. He gripped the chain and gave it a small pull. It rattled weakly. "Where are you?" he said softly. "They wouldn't just throw you away, would they?" But even as he said it, a part of him already knew. Dogs like Asher weren't given medals or pensions. They were listed as equipment in inventory systems, transferred, reassigned, decommissioned, sanitized words for abandonment. He returned to the porch and sat again, refreshed the message thread. Still nothing. Just delivered. Grant stared at it until his vision blurred. Then, for the first time in months, he whispered the dog's name aloud. Asher. The word hung in the air like a prayer no one would answer. The screen dimmed. The stars kept burning above. And somewhere in that vast, empty night, silence pressed its weight down hard, heavier than any battlefield ever had. Morning came without ceremony. The light didn't pour in. It crept, gray and reluctant, through cracked blinds and settled over Grant Mallory's unshaven face like a veil. He hadn't slept. Not really. The message to Lomas remained unanswered, sitting in his inbox like a tombstone. Every time he refreshed the page, it taunted him with the same word: delivered. The coffee in his hand was bitter and cold, but he sipped it anyway as he opened his laptop again, jaw tight. No new messages, no notifications, no one coming. So he did what Marines do when they're pinned and forgotten. He advanced. His first call was to the base where he and Asher had last deployed out of Camp Ironsight, Nevada. The operator transferred him 3 times before a clipped voice answered. "Sergeant Mallory, you're no longer active. Records access is restricted. You'll need to file an FOIA request." "I'm not asking for top-secret files," Grant said, forcing calm. "Just a status report on a canine I was assigned to. Military working dog, serial number 7 Alpha Romeo 113. Name, Asher." A pause, fingers typing. "Status, transferred." "To where?" "I'm not authorized to disclose." "Why?" he snapped. The line was quiet then. "Because it's classified under a third-party reassignment. That's all I can say." And just like that, the line went dead. He slammed the laptop shut so hard the whiskey glass beside it jumped. Asher wasn't a number. He wasn't a file. He was a soul, a partner, someone who pulled him through dirt under enemy fire and kept him alive on nights where Grant's will had faltered. He dialed again, this time an old contact from Kuwait, Corporal Nate Bauer, now civilian security. "Grant?" Nate's voice sounded like gravel. "Been years, man." "Yeah," Grant said. "I'm trying to find someone." "Someone?" "Not a person, a dog." Nate paused. "You mean Asher?" Grant's breath caught. "You've heard something?" Nate sighed. "Look, all I know is rumor. After you got sent home, there was talk Asher was going to be retired with you." "Was?" Grant's fingers gripped the table. "Yeah, but then some contract dispute came up. Logistics took over. They said he'd be temporarily reassigned for behavior evaluation, whatever that means. Last I heard, he went to some holding kennel in Texas. Private contractor, sketchy as hell." "What was the name?" "Didn't say. But someone mentioned the outfit was tied to a shell corp. I'll send you what I've got." The call ended. 3 minutes later, Grant received a photo. A blurred shipment manifest with a coded ID and a barely legible company stamp. Canis Systems Solutions. No address. No contact. Just a P.O. box and a tracking number that ended months ago. The rest of the day was a blur of rabbit holes. Grant pulled apart the corporation's registration data. It led to a dissolved LLC in Florida. He posted in 2 restricted veteran forums asking if anyone had heard of Canis Systems. One user replied, "Shady, known for flipping retired MWDs into private security, sometimes worse." Worse? He didn't want to know what that meant. By evening, his screen was a minefield of open tabs, dead-end links, archived military dog transfer records, and forum threads filled with rage and heartbreak. One comment hit him harder than most. "My canine saved me twice in Fallujah. I thought he was sent to retirement. Found out a year later he was being tested for aggression response in a cage down south. No daylight, no handler, just cameras." The rage simmered in his stomach like acid. He pushed the laptop away and buried his face in his hands. That night, the wind rose over the plains, howling low through the cracks of the old house. The walls shifted and creaked like something was walking between them. Grant finally collapsed into bed just after midnight, fully dressed, the ache in his back burning straight through to bone. Sleep came, but it was not merciful. He was back in Syria. The sand was hot. The radio buzzed static. Gunfire crackled somewhere to the east, then closer, too close. He turned to shout but couldn't form words. Smoke bloomed in the sky like black flowers. Then, movement. Asher, running toward him, muzzle covered in soot, ears pinned, eyes locked on something just over Grant's shoulder. A shadow moved. Gunshots. Screaming. Asher leapt, teeth bared, and the world went white. Grant shot upright in bed, chest heaving. Sweat soaked his shirt. His fists clenched the sheets like a lifeline. Then, clink. A sound. He froze. It wasn't in his dream. Clink, clink, metal, chain. His heart thundered. His mind scrambled. His eyes adjusted in the dark. And then he saw it. The old leash, the one Asher had trained with, hanging from a nail by the door, swaying slowly from the wind. It must have been the breeze, but in that moment it felt like something else, like a warning, or a memory too heavy to stay quiet. He stared at it for a long time, and then he whispered, barely audible, "I'm coming for you." The glow from the laptop screen lit the living room in cold blue as midnight slipped quietly into 2:00 a.m. Grant Mallory sat hunched forward on the couch, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. The rest of the house was silent, save for the hum of the fridge and the occasional whisper of wind brushing the windows like a ghost looking for a way in. The only other light came from the tip of a dying cigarette in the ashtray beside him, his third tonight. He didn't smoke often, not anymore, but something about the silence made the ritual feel necessary. Like armor, like breath control before pulling a trigger. He tapped at the keyboard with deliberate fingers. His eyes narrowed as he navigated past firewalls and login screens that would have locked out anyone who didn't know the buried back doors of the veteran community. The forum was called Echo Black, a dark thread network known only to retired handlers, spec ops, and men who still dreamed in tactical radio code. There were no profile pictures, no usernames, only aliases and encrypted handles like Razor Eye, Wolf Zeta, and Sixth Step Whiskey. Grant typed under the name he hadn't used since Fallujah. Echo Chalk. Echo Chalk. Anyone here of a dog MWD Asher transferred post-rotation from Task Unit Delta 9? Shepherd. Tan with a black saddle. Tattoo ID 7AR113. Last known attached handler was myself. I lost contact after med discharge. Base won't talk. Need eyes, need truth. He hit enter and waited. The silence stretched like wire between heartbeats. After 20 minutes, a notification blinked red. Private message. Handle, Dust Cairn. Saw a shepherd matching that in Texas. Scrappy, scarred face. Looked older than he was. This was 6 months back. At a kennel behind an old cement plant near Denton. Didn't seem right. No signage, no handler, just chain link and cameras. Grant's pulse picked up. He typed fast. Echo Chalk. You sure? Dust Cairn. Sure enough to still see those eyes when I try to sleep. Place gave me the creeps. Not military, not rescue either. One of those ghost zones. I asked about adoption. They said the dog wasn't available to civilians. Didn't like the way they said it. Grant copied the message, saved a screenshot. Then he opened another browser, dug deeper. He searched kennels, plus Denton, plus security contractor, then narrowed to tax filings. Nothing obvious. Then he remembered the name from the blurred manifest Nate had sent, Canis Systems Solutions. When he typed it in, the search yielded a dead page and a filing status, dissolved. But it had subsidiaries, one of them active, a holding company registered to a P.O. box in Waco. That one, in turn, owned a transport logistics outfit specializing in biological asset relocation. He followed the chain, fingers flying. Every name led to another shell, another layer of legal fog designed to obscure something meant to stay hidden. But Grant had walked through smokescreens before. He wasn't looking for a paper trail anymore. He was looking for a pattern of intent. Somewhere between the lines, something clicked. He pulled up a satellite image of the industrial corridor outside Denton. Scrubland, storage yards, cement plants. Half of it looked abandoned. But one fenced compound stood out fresh gravel on the driveway. Rows of metal kennels, black shipping containers stacked like coffins along the back wall. No signage, no official registration. He marked the coordinates and stared. Is that where they put you? He thought of Asher, the dog who once walked through fire without hesitation, who'd laid beside him on a rooftop in Mosul, keeping watch through the night, while Grant slept with his rifle across his chest and nightmares pressing on his lungs. The idea that that same creature had been caged behind chain link in some shadow operation that didn't even have a name. Grant stood abruptly, knocking the ashtray to the floor. He walked into the kitchen and splashed water on his face, gripping the edges of the sink. They said they'd take care of him. That's what they told him during debrief. He'll be reassigned or retired appropriately. You focus on healing, Sergeant. Healing? He almost laughed. What did that even mean? His hands trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper, rage sharpened by helplessness, the kind that seared slow and deep like shrapnel you couldn't dig out. He returned to the laptop. A new thread had appeared in the forum, handle 6 Bravo. You looking for Asher? Saw your post. That dog's a legend. Used to run point clearance in Kirkuk, right? Be careful poking around Canis. They're subcontracted under Treadwell Logistics. Known for behavior reconditioning contracts. Real hush-hush. Not for reintegration. For reprogramming. Grant's blood ran cold. 6 Bravo. Word is they flip retired MWDs into private asset protection overseas. Dogs don't last long. High turnover. Zero oversight. He closed the laptop slowly. The image of Asher sitting alone in a dark cell, forced to unlearn everything he was ever taught, forced to forget Grant, forget his name, forget who he was, burned into his chest like acid. Not him, not Asher. If the world had decided to forget his dog, fine. But he wouldn't. Not again. He opened the drawer beside the couch and pulled out a worn notepad. Inside were scribbles from yesterday. Names, P.O. boxes, half-traced LLCs. He turned to a new page and wrote down one thing. Coordinates. Denton Industrial Lot. Confirm, intervene, recover. Underneath it, in block letters, Asher is alive. The map on Grant's screen flickered with static, an aging satellite overlay stuttering under slow internet. The coordinates hovered in the bottom corner, 32.8055 dig N, 96.8971 dig W, just outside Dallas. An area thick with warehouses, storage yards, and decommissioned industrial sprawl that had long since been forgotten by zoning boards and city lights. He zoomed in slowly. The compound wasn't labeled. No name, no number. Just a slab of fenced land shaped like a coffin, nestled behind an old concrete plant with busted silos and sun-faded warnings about silica dust. But what caught his eye wasn't the structure. It was the subtle maintenance. New gravel on the entrance drive. Shadows cast by metal kennels aligned in grid-like precision. A black SUV parked near a double-door container, partially obscured by tarp and fencing. This place wasn't abandoned, it was hiding. Grant leaned back from the screen. For a moment, the air felt too thin to breathe. He stared at the coordinates again. They didn't just lead to a location. They pointed to a door, and behind that door, maybe, just maybe, was the only creature left in the world who truly knew him. He didn't hesitate. He shut the laptop, shoved it in his duffel bag, and started packing. The duffel filled fast. Spare clothes, 2 MREs, a flashlight, a digital recorder, a printed satellite image, a flare gun. Old habits returned like muscle memory. Zip ties, a multi-tool, a folded tactical vest. He hesitated at the small lockbox under his bed. Inside was his service pistol, long since decommissioned. He ran his fingers across the handle, then closed the lid. This wasn't a mission. This was personal. He tossed the bag into the passenger seat of his truck. The old engine groaned as it came to life, lights flickering before stabilizing. Grant threw it into drive, turned toward the road that had carried him away from this place once before, and didn't look back. The first 100 miles were numb. Fields gave way to open plains, plains to patches of pine, then long stretches of midnight asphalt stretching endlessly toward Texas. The radio stayed off. His mind was louder than any station could drown out. Every road sign felt like a countdown. He remembered the weight of Asher's harness as he lifted him into a medevac after that night in Anbar. The dog had taken shrapnel shielding a civilian, but still limped to Grant's side when the dust cleared. No hesitation, no question. What had the system given him in return? A cage. Grant gripped the steering wheel harder. He drove through Amarillo around 2:00 a.m., his eyelids sandpapered with fatigue. The rest stop lights blurred against the windshield, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. He feared if he pulled over, even for a minute, the exhaustion would swallow him whole. At 4:30, a truck stop outside Wichita Falls offered gas and nothing more. As he filled the tank, he saw a stray dog sitting beside a dumpster, thin and limping, staring up at him through the shadows. Its eyes were the same amber shade. His throat tightened. Back on the highway, his fingers tapped restlessly against the steering wheel. He played old commands in his head like mantras. Bleib, Sitz, Voran. Each one echoed with Asher's voice, silent but loyal, always precise, always listening. He didn't know what he'd find at the warehouse. Part of him was prepared for the worst. Ashes in a cold incinerator, a blank file labeled destroyed. But hope had a way of surviving things it shouldn't. And tonight, it was burning like a fuse in his chest. The horizon began to tint gray as dawn crept closer. He hadn't slept. His hands ached. His back throbbed. But his eyes were fixed forward. The city lights of Dallas began to bleed into view, distant amber clusters between dark silhouettes of warehouses and train yards. He followed the GPS directions like a soldier reading a battlefield map. Each turn closer made the knot in his chest tighten. The roads became narrower, more desolate, lined with rusted fencing and graffiti-soaked cinder-block walls. The kind of place no one drove through unless they had a reason. At 6:12 a.m., he turned onto a gravel path and killed the engine. There it was, just like the map, a wire fence half covered in black tarp, rows of metal containers stacked like forgotten freight, a padlocked gate, surveillance cameras tucked into shadows like watching eyes. The sun had yet to rise, the sky was bruised lavender, and the only sound was wind moving through hollow things. He sat in silence, hands still on the wheel, eyes fixed on the compound. somewhere behind those walls, he could feel it. The presence, the pull. Asher. He exhaled once, slow, then whispered, "I'm here." The chain-link fence rattled as Grant Mallory slipped through a torn seam in the wire, boots crunching over loose gravel and broken glass. The air was thick with rust and mildew, the kind of damp that clung to your lungs and whispered things you didn't want to hear. Dawn hadn't fully broken yet. A cold lavender haze lingered over the horizon, painting the rows of stacked containers in shades of blue and ash. Somewhere nearby, a buzz of fluorescent light flickered inside a prefab trailer, but no vehicles stirred, no human voices, just the wind and something else. A sound, metal, faint but real, clink. Then silence. Grant froze, listening. It came again. Chain, movement, a dragging sound. He crouched low, moved past a stack of discarded pallets and ducked behind a half-collapsed privacy tarp. Ahead, a long rectangular pen stretched along the back of the facility. Chain-link fencing bolted to concrete slabs, rust climbing the corners like ivy. Makeshift kennels. At least 6 of them. Only one was occupied. Grant's breath caught in his throat. A shape lay curled in the back corner, unmoving, almost indistinguishable from the shadows. But then the light shifted, and he saw it. Ribs protruded like the frame of a shipwreck. Fur, or what was left of it, was patchy, coated in grime and dried blood. Flies hovered above open sores on its flanks. Its tail, or what remained, lay limp, motionless. A tattered collar hung from its neck, barely readable. 7R113. Grant's knees gave out before he realized he was falling. He dropped to the ground with a thud, hands gripping the cold gravel as his breath escaped him in short, ragged bursts. His throat tightened. His eyes burned. "Asher," he choked. No response. The dog didn't lift its head, didn't flinch, didn't move at all. "Asher, it's me," he said again, voice cracking, still nothing. The air was too quiet, like the world itself had pressed pause. Grant crawled forward until his hands were pressed to the chain link. "Buddy, I'm here. I came for you." He reached into his pocket with trembling fingers, pulled out a photo. The one of them both, grinning, dirt-covered, after the rescue op in Kirkuk. He pressed it to the fence. Still no movement. The dog's eyes were open now, barely. But they were clouded, not with blindness, but with the kind of vacant stillness that didn't belong to any living thing. As if he were still breathing out of habit, but not truly here. "Asher," Grant whispered again, leaning closer to the fence. Nothing, only the wind. And then he closed his eyes, took a breath, and said the one word that meant everything between them. "Bleeb." There was a pause, a long, aching stillness. Then a twitch. The dog's ears moved, faint and jerky, like they were remembering how. The tail, bony, brittle, still caked in filth, gave a single, hesitant wag. Grant's breath caught. His hand flew to his mouth as tears stung his eyes. He gripped the fence tighter and lowered his forehead to the cold metal. "Asher," he whispered again, shaking. "You remember?" The dog blinked slowly. A low sound rose from its throat. Not a growl, not even a whimper. Just air, effort, recognition struggling to surface through the fog. "Stay with me," Grant murmured. "I'm getting you out." He stood, scanned the area. The padlock on the kennel gate was rusted through. A few solid strikes from a loose pipe dislodged it with a screech of metal. He opened the gate carefully, stepping in as if approaching a bomb wired to his own heartbeat. The smell was worse inside. Rot and chemical waste mingled in the corners. But none of it mattered. He dropped to one knee. "Asher, it's me. I'm here now." Slowly, painfully, the dog lifted its head. Amber eyes stared into his, dull and sunken, but there, still there. Grant reached out, his hand hovering, then gently made contact. Fingertips brushing against Asher's skull. No flinch, no pull away, only breath, only memory. He gathered the fragile body into his arms with the gentleness of someone holding a child for the first time. Asher didn't resist. His limbs dangled limp, but his head turned slightly, resting, just barely, against Grant's shoulder. The weight was shockingly light. Too light. Grant's jaw clenched as he held back the wave of emotion clawing its way up his throat. "I got you," he said, voice raw. "You're not alone anymore." He carried Asher out of the cage, out of the shadows, through the seam in the fence, and back into the breaking morning. And for the first time in 8 years, Grant Mallory felt like a piece of himself. One he thought was gone forever. Had just come home. The rural veterinary clinic sat at the edge of a dusty back road, hidden behind a rusted windmill and a half-collapsed barn that looked more decorative than functional. The faded sign read Valley Crossing Animal Care, Dr. E. Ruiz, and even that swung crooked on one hinge like it had long since stopped trying to catch attention. But Grant Mallory hadn't come for presentation. He came for salvation. He kicked the truck door open with his knee, arms cradling Asher's limp frame like something sacred. The dog hadn't moved since they left the facility. Only the subtle rise and fall of his rib cage told Grant he was still fighting. Inside the clinic, the air was sharp with antiseptic and pine cleaner. It smelled like memory, like field tents in Mosul, like triage stations at Camp Union, like urgency and hope thrown into the same sterile room. A bell jingled overhead. A nurse behind the counter looked up, eyes widening when she saw the blood-soaked blanket and the dog in Grant's arms. "We need help," Grant said simply, voice hoarse. "Now!" She vanished through the back without a word. Seconds later, a woman appeared, mid-50s, sharp eyes, hair tied back in a bun that had survived more emergencies than it had time for vanity. She wore scrubs, but her posture screamed military. Calm, efficient, already diagnosing before she even spoke. "Bring him back," she said. "Now!" Grant laid Asher on the cold steel examination table with care, like placing a cracked vase that might shatter from breath alone. Dr. Elena Ruiz leaned in. Her hands were fast but gentle, moving with the confidence of someone who had seen the worst and no longer flinched. She didn't ask questions at first. She just worked. Stethoscope, thermometer, needle draw, muzzle assessment, saline flush to the eyes. She scribbled notes on a clipboard with one hand while adjusting the overhead lamp with the other. "Weight?" she asked, barely looking up. 54 pounds, Grant said, guessing. "He used to be 78. She nodded. "Severe muscle loss, dehydrated, pressure sores along the hips. And this." She gently lifted Asher's front paw and turned it over. The pad was cracked open, raw and oozing. Grant's jaw clenched. Dr. Ruiz moved on, parting the fur along Asher's ribs with gloved fingers. Multiple abrasions, skin infections. See this? She pointed to an inflamed line running along the dog's flank, deep, with bruising around the edges. Looks chemical. Possibly corrosive exposure or burn. She pulled out clippers, began shaving small patches to reveal more. Under the fur, Asher's skin told a story no dog should have to live through. Jesus, she muttered. These are electrical burns. Small contact points. Probably a training prod. Grant's fists curled at his sides. I found him locked in a backlot cage behind a decommissioned kennel in Denton, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. No staff, no water bowl, no tags, just a number welded to the gate. Dr. Ruiz turned to him fully for the first time. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned. You're his handler? I was, Grant said. Marine Corps. We deployed together. He saved my life. She nodded slowly. Then you already know. This wasn't neglect. Grant's breath caught. This was intentional. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Intentional. He looked at Asher, chest rising in shallow intervals, eyes closed, ears twitching at nothing, not a sound of protest, not a whimper of pain, just that quiet, heartbreaking endurance. Dr. Ruiz softened slightly. We'll stabilize him. IV fluids, antibiotics. He'll need wound care. Soft food every 2 hours. And rest. A lot of it. Does he have a chance? Grant asked. She met his eyes. He made it this far. That tells me something stronger than medicine is still holding him together. Minutes later, Grant sat in the corner of the exam room, elbows on his knees, watching as an assistant gently wrapped Asher's back legs in gauze. The dog didn't resist, didn't flinch, just stared into nothing, floating somewhere between instinct and resignation. Grant stared at his own boots. The soles were still caked with dirt from the warehouse. He hadn't even noticed. I should have found him sooner, he muttered. Dr. Ruiz glanced up. We all have clocks we wish we could turn back. No, he said, voice sharper than he intended. You don't understand. He wasn't just a dog, he was my responsibility. They told me he'd be retired. They promised. And then they buried him in paperwork and red tape. I let them. He felt something tighten in his chest, not grief, not guilt, rage, but underneath it all an even deeper ache, fear. What if it's too late? He whispered. What if he never comes back to me? Dr. Ruiz stepped over, crouched beside him. I've seen animals come back from worse, she said quietly. But only when someone believes they can. A moment passed, then another. Asher let out a soft exhale, a whimper almost, barely audible. But Grant heard it, and for the first time since that nightmare began, he let himself believe. Asher wasn't gone. Not yet. Not completely. And as long as that spark remained, faint as it was, he would fight to fan it into flame. The hum of the overnight IV pump was the only sound in the dim recovery room. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, flickering like tired eyelids. Shadows stretched long against pale linoleum floors, broken only by the unmoving silhouette of a man curled on a cot beside a metal kennel. Grant Mallory hadn't slept in a real bed since Afghanistan. He'd dozed on planes, trucks, rooftops, hospital chairs, but none of that prepared him for the stillness of waiting here, listening to every breath Asher took, shallow and uneven, fighting for each one like the next might be the last. Asher hadn't looked at him once. Grant had sat beside him for hours after Dr. Ruiz left, whispering old commands, stories, apologies. Even a few off-key bars of the lullaby he used to hum under his breath during patrols, back when Asher would rest his head on Grant's boot between firefights. Nothing. The eyes that used to lock onto him like a homing beacon were now glassy, hollow, not hostile, just absent, like looking at a soul behind glass. Sometime after midnight, Grant drifted off with his back against the wall, knees pulled up to his chest, fingers loosely wrapped around Asher's old service collar, now cleaned and resting on the floor beside the cot. He didn't remember falling asleep, but he remembered the dream. They were back in Kandahar. The wind was dry and sand bit at his skin like needles. Asher was there, strong, fast, tail high and proud, bounding ahead of him through a rocky passageway. They were hunting something. Grant called out to slow him down, but the words fell apart in his throat. Then the leash snapped taut in his hand. Asher was gone. Only silence remained. He reached out in the dream, and instead of fur, his fingers clutched steel chain, cold and rusted. When he jolted awake, the morning light was soft, bleeding gently through the drawn blinds. The clinic was still quiet. No voices. No movement beyond the rhythmic pump at Asher's bedside. And then something else. Weight. Pressure. He looked down and froze. Asher had moved. Only a few inches. Barely a shuffle across the blanket. But his frail, trembling body now lay with his nose touching the edge of Grant's cot. One paw stretched forward, as if reaching not for comfort, but for proof. Proof he wasn't alone. Grant blinked, and his vision blurred not from sleep, but from the unbearable swell behind his ribs. He slid off the cot slowly, afraid the motion might wake him. Asher didn't stir, but his nostrils flared gently, catching Grant's scent, and that tiny, involuntary response shattered what was left of Grant's composure. His hand hovered above the matted fur. And then it fell. He touched Asher's head, lightly at first, like one might touch a porcelain sculpture on the verge of crumbling. "Asher," he whispered. No response, but no flinch either. Grant swallowed hard, wiping his face with the back of his arm. His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." He wasn't sure how long he sat there, fingers tracing the outline of the dog's skull, the familiar notches behind one ear from old shrapnel. "I looked for you," he said softly. "I asked everyone. They lied, told me you were placed with a family, said you were too old for service, that you'd be safe." He exhaled slowly, bitter. "I wanted to believe them, because it was easier." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I was tired." A beat passed. The IV machine beeped once. Outside, a truck passed on the road, gravel crunching under tires. Grant leaned in, forehead pressing against Asher's side. "And while I slept in hotel rooms and tried to be normal, you were out there, alone, locked in a cage." His hand curled into a fist. "We did this," he whispered. "Not the bastards who threw you away. We." The air was heavy, not with guilt, with recognition. This wasn't about fixing something broken. It was about owning what had been allowed to break. Asher stirred faintly. His ears twitched, not fully upright, but responsive. He shifted his body ever so slightly, pressing closer into Grant's legs, as if even in the fog of trauma, some old muscle memory had stirred. The place where he used to sleep, beside the man who once said, "I've got your six," and meant it. Dr. Ruiz stepped into the doorway quietly, not wanting to interrupt. She saw the scene man hunched over, one arm wrapped around the rib cage of a dog who looked like he'd crawled out of death itself. She didn't speak, just watched, until Grant looked up and whispered hoarsely, "He moved." She nodded, stepping forward, checking the monitors. "That's something. Means he knows you're here." Grant brushed his fingers through Asher's fur, brittle and falling away in patches. "Doesn't feel like enough." "It never does," she said gently. "But you're not just his past, Grant. You might be the only thing pulling him forward." He nodded slowly. There was a long silence. Then Grant looked back down, and for the first time since the war ended, he said it out loud, not to the room, not to himself, but to the one soul who mattered. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving again." The photo wasn't meant to start a movement. Grant had taken it with trembling hands. Asher curled on a folded blanket, ribs showing like rungs on a broken ladder, IV line tangled loosely beside his paw. The room was sterile. Fluorescent light drained the color from everything except Asher's eyes, clouded, distant, but barely cracked open. Like a door just ajar enough to show something still lived inside. Grant stared at the screen for a long time before typing. Then he deleted the first draft. Too angry, the second. Too hollow. The third, too safe. It took him 42 minutes, 2 breakdowns, and 1 cold stare into the clinic sink mirror before he finally hit post. "This is Asher, U.S. Army K-9. 2 tours. 7 lives saved. I served beside him. We bled in the same dust. They told me he'd been retired with honor. I found him locked in a cage behind an abandoned warehouse. Starved. Burned. Forgotten. This is how we thank our war dogs. If this breaks your heart, good. It should. A justice for Asher. War dogs deserve better. /John K9 left behind." He didn't expect much, maybe a few likes. A share from an old squad mate. 1 or 2 angry comments from the usual voices. He muted his phone and sat back beside Asher, gently rubbing between the patches of matted fur, his other hand clutching the dog's paw bony and twitching with occasional phantom spasms. An hour later, the nurse walked in, holding her phone. "Did you post something?" Grant raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, why?" She turned her screen toward him. The tweet had over 22,000 shares. By nightfall, it was everywhere. Veteran groups, animal rescue forums, Reddit threads, comment sections lit up like a war room. Screenshots of the post migrated to Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok, overlaid with sobering piano music and black and white transitions. A retired SEAL reposted it, adding, "We never leave a brother behind, not on 2 legs, not on 4. Then came the actors, the influencers. A country singer with 4 million followers tagged the Department of Defense and demanded answers. By midnight, #Justice for Asher trended in 4 countries. Dr. Elena Ruiz emerged from the break room, half stunned, half wary. "Did you plan this?" she asked, looking at the flood of emails crashing her clinic inbox. Grant shook his head slowly. "No, I just couldn't stay quiet anymore." She studied him for a moment. "Then maybe it's about damn time someone didn't." The phone rang non-stop. A journalist from Denver asked for an interview. A documentary crew offered travel expenses and a film contract. A non-profit pledged to cover Asher's medical bills and every other war dog they could find, still trapped in the system. By dawn, even the White House's official account had quietly liked the original post. No statement. But that was enough. The fire had caught, and it wasn't going out. Still, amid the noise, Grant didn't leave Asher's side. Not for the emails, not for the calls, not even when a local news van parked outside the clinic with a telescopic lens aimed at the second-floor window. Because Asher was the story. Not hashtags, not heroes, just a dog who had given everything and almost died with no one watching. Until someone did. Grant's hand trembled as he scrolled through comments. I served. My partner died in my arms. This broke me. I work at a shelter. We've seen dogs like this, but never one with a service record. Why don't we have laws for this? This isn't right. Tell me where he is. I'll drive 500 miles to help. The outpouring felt like both a flood and a mirror. All the things he hadn't said about guilt, abandonment, what it meant to survive while others didn't, they were there now. Not in his words, but in everyone else's. He reached for the collar on the table. Asher's. Polished now, tags still intact. He held it up like an oath. Later that night, Grant turned his phone camera to himself, a rare thing. His eyes were bloodshot, voice raw. No filters, just truth. He recorded in one take. You don't have to know war to understand this. You just have to believe that loyalty like his should never end in a cage. I found Asher too late to stop the pain, but maybe not too late to stop it for the next one. We trained them to save us. Time we saved them back. He posted it without tags. Within an hour, it had over 500,000 views. At 2:37 a.m., his phone buzzed with a name he hadn't seen in years. Colonel Darius Harlan. Grant stared at it for a long time. The man who ran Asher's original unit. The man who signed the retirement forms. He answered. Mallory, came the gravel-rough voice. We need to talk, off record. Grant looked down at Asher, still sleeping, chest barely rising. He stepped outside into the cold air, voice low, knuckles white. Good, because I want names. The gravel in front of Grant's ranch hadn't seen this many tires in years. By 9 a.m., the dust plume carried satellite trucks, tripods, and journalists with polite smiles and rehearsed outrage. Boom mics floated above camera crews like vultures waiting for the sound of something broken. They came from everywhere, CNN, local affiliates, online platforms with millions of followers, and some that just wanted a quick quote, as if the truth could be distilled into sound bites between commercial breaks. Grant stood on the porch in his worn-out flannel, arms crossed. He didn't wave. He just watched. And waited. Inside the house, Asher lay curled on a wool blanket near the fireplace. Still too weak to run, but no longer flinching at every creak of floorboard. His fur had begun to soften around the edges, less brittle, less defeated. Dr. Ruiz had dropped off antibiotics that morning, slipping past the chaos like a ghost in scrubs. He's healing, she'd whispered. But it's the quiet kind. No applause. Grant understood that kind of healing. The kind where nothing looked dramatic on the surface, just the slow return of breath, of trust, of being alive and not wondering why. By noon, one reporter shouted through the fence, Mr. Mallory, will you confirm the Department of Defense has opened a case? Another, is it true the Pentagon blacklisted the contractor tied to the kennel where Asher was found? And a third, do you have a statement about the leaked documents? Grant didn't flinch. He'd seen bullets fly closer than words, but he could feel the tension humming just under his skin like old wounds remembering how to bleed. It wasn't until late afternoon that he agreed to one interview. One, not in front of the cameras lined up like firing squads, but under the oak tree behind the barn, where he used to sit with his father before deployments, where silence had always meant something sacred. He chose a reporter who didn't ask for exclusives, just respect. Grant sat cross-legged in the grass, Asher's head resting gently in his lap. The shepherd's body trembled now and then, muscle memory still waking from nightmares. But his eyes remained open, clouded, yes, but on Grant. Always on Grant. The cameraman kept his distance. The reporter, a woman in her 30s with crow's feet carved by war zones, nodded once and whispered, "Whenever you're ready." Grant's voice was quiet, but not weak. I was a different man when I met Asher. I didn't know what home felt like, what being protected really meant. I was trained to fight, to follow, but he was the only one who watched my back, even when I didn't ask, even when I didn't deserve it. He looked down. His hand rested on the spot behind Asher's ear, rubbing gently. They call them equipment, numbers, retired assets. That's not what I see. I see a soul who gave more than most men I served with. And we left him behind. He paused. Voice cracked. He saved me. Now it's my turn. Silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The camera clicked off. The reporter didn't thank him. She simply reached out, gently touching Asher's paw with reverence, then walked away. Some stories didn't need wrapping paper. That night, the clip aired nationally. Uncut, no ads, just 5 minutes of a man, a dog, and a promise too sacred to break. But not everyone applauded. At 2 a.m., Grant's inbox filled with veiled warnings from anonymous accounts. His front gate was spray-painted red by morning. Lies, stop digging. A black SUV idled too long across the road before disappearing down the gravel. Grant didn't report it, didn't run. He just walked back inside, poured a mug of black coffee, and whispered to Asher, "We're not done yet." Because when the truth makes enemies, it means you're aiming at something that matters. It started with a single retweet. Then it was everywhere. By sunrise, justice for Asher was trending globally, not just in veteran circles or rescue groups, but on parenting blogs, climate activist feeds, book club forums. Somehow, this mangled dog and the quiet man who wouldn't look into cameras had touched something raw, universal, unspoken. The world didn't just care. It burned. Grant sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the old refrigerator the only sound besides the soft whir of his laptop fan. He hadn't slept. Again. He clicked refresh. The photo of Asher, eyes clouded, bones showing through matted fur, curled into the corner of that warehouse like he was trying to vanish, had been shared over 6.4 million times. His words underneath still lit up the screen. This is Asher. He served. He bled. He was left behind. We did this. We can do better. Dr. Elena Ruiz forwarded him an email with the subject line, "Coalition forming." Within it, a dozen animal welfare groups had signed a joint statement. Some were big names Grant had seen on TV with glossy donation ads. Some were scrappy grassroots networks working out of converted garages. But they all agreed on one thing: no more silent retirements, no more private contracts. War dogs are not equipment. They are veterans. He got calls from strange area codes. A film producer wanted the rights. A podcaster wanted his voice. A high school from Vermont asked if they could name their upcoming canine mascot Asher. Grant said no to the first two and told the kids in Vermont, "Only if you mean it." Then came the speech. It aired mid-afternoon. A clip spliced onto every major outlet before Grant could even understand what was happening. A senator from Wisconsin stood before the House Armed Services Committee, holding a framed still of the viral image in her hand. She didn't grandstand. She didn't dramatize. She just said, "I don't know this man, but I know the bond between a soldier and his dog doesn't end when the tour is over. We have spent decades praising our canine units, putting them on calendars, parades, recruiting posters. Then we let them rot in warehouses like expired gear. This ends now. I am introducing the Asher Act bill that will mandate public tracking of all retired military and government service dogs, ensure proper rehoming, and criminalize neglect post-deployment." The room went quiet, and then applause. Grant leaned back in his chair, stared at the screen, didn't cry, didn't speak. He just looked at Asher, who lay nearby on the rug, tail twitching in his sleep. He whispered, "They said your name." Asher didn't wake, but his breathing steadied. By evening, Grant's mailbox was full, not with spam or threats this time, but letters, actual paper, from veterans, from kids, from a woman in Kansas who said her dad never talked about the war until he saw the video of Grant under the tree. He called me crying, said he remembered the dog that saved him. He never told anyone before. One letter came in handwriting Grant hadn't seen since Fallujah. A former squad mate, presumed dead in an IED blast. He was alive, living in West Virginia under a new name. The note was 4 sentences long. "I saw Asher once, not in uniform. He didn't look right. You keep going. Finish it." The pity was turning into something sharper, louder, legislative. Grant didn't know politics, didn't care for it, but he knew what it meant to be invisible. And now, Asher wasn't. None of them were. On the porch that night, Grant sat with a cup of lukewarm coffee. The stars blinked overhead like tiny apologies. Asher was beside him, wrapped in a fleece blanket sent by a military family from Ohio. "I didn't plan for any of this," Grant said softly. Asher's ear flicked. Neither did the world, but when something is broken loud enough, sometimes even Washington listens. The late autumn sun poured through the kitchen window in ribbons of pale gold, warming the scarred oak floorboards that had once carried the thunder of a puppy's paws. Now they waited, quiet, expectant, as Asher lay stretched on a folded quilt just inside the rectangle of light. A slow, steady wheeze fluttered from his nostrils each time he exhaled, as though his lungs still argued with the air they'd been denied for too long. Grant Mallory knelt beside the stove, stirring a pot of bone broth that simmered with rice, shredded chicken, and a whisper of turmeric. Dr. Ruiz insisted would soothe inflammation. The smell filled the room, rich, alive, everything the kennel had stolen. He ladled the broth over softened kibble, waited until the steam calmed, then set the ceramic bowl on the floor. "Asher," he called softly, voice rough from a week of interviews, calls, and restless nights. Amber eyes flickered open. They were clearer now, still glassy at the edges, but carrying a question instead of emptiness. Grant eased the bowl under the dog's nose. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Asher's nostrils flared. He sniffed once, twice, and tentative as Dawn pressed his tongue to the broth. Grant didn't breathe. Each lick sounded impossibly loud in the hush of the kitchen. Asher's tongue moved again, faster, gathering rice and chicken. His jaws worked. He swallowed. The motion looked foreign, shaky, like a muscle memory buried under months of starvation, clawing its way back into the light. Half the bowl disappeared in 60 seconds. Grant's eyes shone with something between awe and terror, afraid any sudden movement might shatter the fragile miracle unfolding at his feet. But when Asher paused, chin dripping broth, Grant slid the bowl an inch closer. "Take your time, buddy," he whispered. "Plenty more where that came from." Asher finished every grain, then nudged the bowl with his nose, searching for more. Grant chuckled, a sound rusty with disuse, and ran a trembling hand along the dog's neck. He could still count every vertebra, yet the skin felt less like parchment, warmer beneath his palm. "That's a full ration," he said, voice tight with pride. "First one since you saved that family in Ramadi." Memory flickered behind the shepherd's eyes, brief, uncertain but real enough to pinch Grant's throat. Asher shifted his weight, forelegs bracing against the blanket. His elbows shook. Grant reached instinctively, then stopped himself. Dr. Ruiz's words echoed. He needs to choose to stand. The dog hauled his front half upright, ribs expanded with the effort, claws scraped wood. He steadied, back legs tucked awkwardly beneath his hips. For a moment, he hovered between collapse and triumph, chest heaving. "Easy," Grant breathed, palms hovering a hair from Asher's flank, close enough to catch him, far enough to let him fight. Then, with a soft grunt, Asher planted one hind paw, then the other. He rose, trembling but tall enough for the sun to stain the white of his muzzle amber. His head lifted, ears tried to perk, and in that fragile second the kitchen was silent except for Grant's heartbeat roaring in his ears. Asher took a step. It was clumsy more sway than stride, but the paw landed, toes splaying for balance. Another quiver of muscles, and the second hind leg followed. He stood fully now, 4 points of contact, chest out, as if a memory of parade posture straightened his spine. Something broke inside Grant, a dam he'd mortared together with grit and mission focus, and rage turned purpose. Tears blurred the room into watercolor as he knelt eye level with the shepherd. "That's it," he choked. "That's my guy." Asher's gaze locked onto him. For the first time since the warehouse, recognition glimmered dim but unmistakable, like a lantern igniting in a tunnel. His tail thin, patchy shifted once, a cautious sway. Then again, a fraction wider, the motion awkward yet stubbornly alive. Grant laughed, a hoarse, cracking bark of joy, and let the tears fall unhidden. He pressed his forehead to Asher's, feeling the damp of broth-stained whiskers against his skin. "Welcome back, buddy," he whispered, the words trembling like a prayer finally answered. "Welcome back." The tail wagged a third time, small, earnest enough. Outside, reporters still circled, legislation still brewed, and a storm of public fury churned beyond the ranch gates. But inside this quiet kitchen, victory measured itself in 16 ounces of chicken broth, 2 trembling steps, and the muted thump sweep of a tail, remembering what hope felt like. Grant stayed there on the sunlit floor, one hand steadying Asher's shoulder, the other held over the dog's heart. He felt the beat weak, but rhythm true, and matched his breathing to it. One beat for loyalty, one for survival, one for the long road still ahead, paved now with something stronger than pity, brighter than rage. Possibility. The sky was still holding its breath between seasons too cold for spring, too soft for winter. A light wind slid across the grass, carrying the scent of pine, wet soil, and distant water. Grant stood by the open screen door, leash in hand. Asher sat just inside, staring at the threshold like it was a cliff edge, his body low, taut, ears up, but unsure. "You don't have to," Grant said quietly, "but if you want." The leash made no sound, no pull, just an offering, like that first bowl of food. Minutes passed. Then Asher stood, slow, uneven, but it was his choice. He stepped outside. The gravel path to the lake had once been a driveway. Now it was lined with weeds and half-buried memories. Each crunch beneath Asher's paws made him flinch. Grant didn't rush him. He walked beside him, one step behind, let Asher lead or stop as needed. At the rustle of a squirrel in the brush, Asher froze. Head low, breath shallow, muscles coiled. Grant waited. "Asher," he said, calm, not commanding. "We're okay." Asher looked back, not panicked, just questioning. And in that look Grant saw it, the flicker of trust trying to rebuild itself. They reached the lake by noon, still water. Wind kissed, reflecting a sky the color of steel. Asher approached the edge, nose twitching. His paws left soft impressions in the sand. When a branch cracked behind them, he jumped but didn't bolt. He turned, looked for Grant. Grant just knelt down, hand resting on his knee. "No cages here, buddy." And that's when Asher sat, right beside him. Not touching, but close. They stayed like that for a while. Grant skipped a stone. It plunked without elegance. Asher watched the ripples. Another step forward, peace, however brief. On the walk back, Asher moved more freely. He didn't sniff, not yet. But his ears didn't pin as tightly. His shoulders loosened. He even led for a few feet before glancing back, as if to say, "Still behind me?" Grant smiled. "I'm here." The leash stayed slack the whole way home. Back inside, Asher curled up near the fireplace, not pressed against the wall like before, closer to the center of the room. Grant crouched beside him and ran a hand gently down his spine. The fur was coarse in patches, skin still raw in places. But Asher didn't flinch. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, slept with his chest exposed, unguarded. Outside, the wind carried whispers of the past. Inside, for now, there was only the crackle of logs and the sound of breathing, one steady, one still learning how. One dog, one man, both learning what it means to walk forward. They walked the trail again the next morning. The light was slow to rise, filtered through mist that clung to the treetops like old sorrow. No birds yet. Just the hush of wind grazing through leaves that hadn't decided if they should return. Grant didn't leash Asher this time. The dog walked beside him without needing it, still skittish, still scanning, but quieter inside. They followed the gravel path, now familiar beneath their feet, until it opened to the wide view of the lake, silver and still, like it hadn't aged since yesterday. And that's when Grant spoke. Not a command, not a whisper, just truth. "I still see it sometimes," he began, voice low. Asher's ears perked, not alarmed, just listening. "The alley into Crete, the one with the rebar sticking out the window. You remember that?" He let the question hang in the air like smoke. Of course, Asher didn't reply. But something about speaking the words aloud cracked something in Grant. "I stepped left. I shouldn't have. I know I shouldn't have. You barked, loudest you ever did, pulled me back." A beat of silence. "I think about that sound more than the gunfire." "Weird, huh?" Asher looked at him, head tilted just slightly. Grant exhaled. They kept walking. With every step, the words came easier, like the trail itself was pulling stories from the marrow of his bones. "I never told you how scared I was. The day Ramirez went down, you stayed with him, wouldn't move until they dragged him out. like you thought if you stayed it would fix it." The wind picked up, brushing his words into the trees. But it didn't, and neither did I. By the time they reached the overlook, a rusted bench facing the hills, Grant sat down hard. His knees cracked like old wood. Asher stood nearby, watching, waiting, and then, slowly, he laid at Grant's feet, like he used to. "I hated coming home," Grant said, softer now. "Everyone thought I should be grateful, breathing, in one piece." He scoffed. "But the truth is I felt like a ghost in my own house." He paused, looked down at Asher. "You were the only one who didn't expect me to explain it. You just sat there, quiet, present. God, I missed that." His voice broke on the last word. He didn't wipe the tear that rolled down. Didn't need to. The trees whispered. And for the first time in years, Grant didn't feel like he was talking to himself. They stayed until the clouds broke open just enough for sunlight to catch the lake, painting the water gold. Grant stood. Asher stood with him. On the way back, the silence between them was different, not hollow, not haunted, full of things they didn't need to say anymore. That night, back at the cabin, Grant left the porch light off. He sat in the dark with a beer and no armor. Inside, Asher slept, not curled in defense, but sprawled in trust. And somewhere in that stillness, in that quiet, too full to be empty, Grant whispered, "Thanks for listening, bud," and meant it. It hit just past 2 a.m., same hour it always did. The silence of the cabin cracked open with the gasp of a man drowning in air. Grant bolted upright, soaked in sweat, heart pounding like a war drum. His breath came in short, ragged pulls. Disoriented. Where was he? For a split second, the walls of the cabin weren't there. Only sand. Sirens. Screams muffled under collapsing concrete. The sound of boots sprinting. The bark of an M4. And then silence. Until the soft scrape of claws on wood. A shadow moved in the moonlight. No barking, no panic. Just Asher. The old shepherd approached, like mist, quiet, deliberate. Grant couldn't speak. His fists were clenched, jaw locked in some invisible grip. His chest heaved like something inside was trying to claw its way out. Then he felt it. A paw, gently, firmly, pressing against his chest. Asher had placed it there, not scratching, not demanding, just being, weight, warmth, anchor, like Grant used to do for him. They didn't speak. They never needed to. The nightmare stayed in the room with them, didn't leave. But it stopped moving, stopped pressing. Grant leaned back against the headboard, one hand covering Asher's paw. The rhythm of his breathing slowed, rough but less jagged now. A few minutes passed like that, maybe longer. Time folded. Then Grant whispered into the dark, "Used to be me keeping you alive, huh?" Asher blinked. No sound. Just those steady eyes, clouded but present. Present in a way that cut through the fog better than any words could. The window stayed cracked. The wind rustled through pine needles outside like it was trying to carry the weight of the things unsaid. Grant stared up at the ceiling. "I thought if I buried it all deep enough, it'd stop waking me up." Silence. "I thought if I kept everyone out, I couldn't lose them again." A pause. His voice cracked on the next line. "But I lost you anyway." Asher shifted. Not much. Just enough to close the final inch of space between them. His body pressed against Grant's leg now, warm, grounding, familiar, like an old photograph you forgot existed until it breaks you with its clarity. Grant didn't sleep again that night, but he didn't need to. He just sat there, awake with Asher, watching the shadows stretch and retreat like they used to in tents overseas. And when the morning light finally bled through the curtain, painting the room in soft grays and golds, Asher was still there, still pressed against him, still listening. There would be more nightmares, that much was certain. But something had changed. The leash had switched. The sun was still lazy behind the tree line when Grant pulled up to the Pine Creek General Store. It was the kind of place where locals picked up propane, jerky, and scratch-off tickets all in one breath. The bell above the door still rang like it hadn't been tuned since the '80s. "Asher, stay," Grant said gently, palm brushing over the shepherd's head. Asher gave a small woof of acknowledgment, curling into the front seat like a coiled sentinel. His ears twitched with every movement, but his body stayed still, an echo of training that still held. Grant stepped into the store, the bell jingling overhead. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly. A woman with a stroller browsed the refrigerated section. A teenager manned the counter, earbuds in. Grant grabbed a gallon of milk, some batteries. His mind was elsewhere, half listening to the world, half rewinding memories of sleepless nights, dog food trials, and the slow return of a tail wag. Then the door burst open. A man in a gray hoodie stormed in, arm extended, the glint of a pistol shaking in his hand. "Everyone on the ground! Now!" The scream carved the air like a blade. The teenager at the counter froze, mouth open. Grant dropped the milk. The bottle hit the floor with a smack, exploding into white across the tile. The man whirled, pointed the gun. "I said down!" The woman with the stroller screamed. Her child, maybe 5, maybe 6, stared up with wide, unblinking eyes. The man lunged, grabbed the boy by the collar, yanking him from his mother's arms like a sack of groceries. "No, no, please," she sobbed, dropping to her knees. "Shut up," the man barked, dragging the boy toward the center of the store. "I'll shoot. I swear to God." Grant had seen this kind of panic before. Not here. Not with fluorescent lights and top 40 radio playing in the background, but the look in that man's eyes, he'd seen it in villages leveled by drone fire, in cities carved open by vengeance, unstable, cornered, deadly. Grant's hands rose slowly. "Hey," he said calmly, "you don't want to do this." The gunman's eyes snapped to him. Grant's body language shifted subtly, chest out, shoulders back, voice low but steady. "Let the kid go." "You shut up!" The man's hand shook. The barrel of the gun bounced erratically as adrenaline surged through his veins. Grant scanned the situation. The clerk hadn't moved. The mother was hyperventilating. And outside, Asher. Grant's pulse spiked. He knew the shepherd would still be watching through the windshield, waiting. The gunman backed toward the door, dragging the kid with him. "I want a car, now. I'll kill him, I swear I'll—" He never finished, because the front window shattered in a storm of motion and fury. A blur of black and tan muscle smashed through the glass. Asher. He moved like he'd never been broken, like something ancient had lit inside him. The gunman turned just in time to see the shepherd launch teeth bared, eyes locked, body a weapon forged from instinct and memory. The gun went off, a deafening crack. The mother screamed, but the bullet hit glass. And then Asher was on him. The man hit the ground hard, guns skidding across the linoleum. Asher pinned him, teeth locked just shy of the throat. Grant moved fast, faster than he'd moved in years, kicking the weapon out of reach and dragging the man's arms behind his back with a precision that never really left him. By the time the cops arrived, the store was silent. The mother sobbed into her child's hair. The clerk trembled behind the register. And Asher? Asher stood guard, still and alert. Blood from a shallow scrape on his leg stained the tile beneath him. But his eyes never left Grant. The officers tried to pull Asher back, tried to corral the scene, but Grant stepped between them. "He's not going anywhere," he said, voice rough with pride. "He just saved all of us." They didn't argue. Not after the store owner reviewed the footage. Not after the boy clung to Asher's neck like he was hugging a superhero in fur. Outside, Grant sat on the tailgate of his truck. Asher leaned against his leg, head low, eyes tired but calm. "You broke protocol," Grant said softly. Asher flicked an ear. Grant exhaled, hand resting on the dog's ribs. "I'd have done the same." A pause. Then he added, quieter, "Guess that makes us even now." The sun finally broke free of the trees, warming the pavement in gold. And for the first time in a long time, Grant didn't feel like a man running from shadows. He felt like someone standing with one. The store fell into a frozen quiet. The boy's cries had gone silent, replaced by that strange stillness that follows when the body knows danger is closer than breath. The gunman's voice cracked as he shouted orders. He didn't even notice the growing fog on the glass of the truck outside or the dark figure watching through it. Asher's gaze had locked in the moment Grant disappeared inside. His ears twitched with every sound. A cry, a scream, a muffled threat. And somewhere behind those amber eyes, the code reactivated. Not out of obedience. Not because someone told him to, but because Grant was in there. And there was a child. The handle on the truck door gave with the slightest click. Asher pressed down, body weight shifting just enough. The lock disengaged with a mechanical sigh. No bark, no growl, just motion. Controlled, clean. He stepped out, paw pads silent against gravel, muscles coiled in instinctual choreography. Not a wasted movement, not even a breath too loud. Through the shattered side window he caught the scent gunpowder and sweat. One heartbeat later, Asher was inside. The store's bell never rang. He didn't need it. The gunman was backing toward the door now, dragging the little girl by her ponytail, one trembling hand still locked on the pistol. "Stay back! I'll do it! Don't you—" The next sound was nothing, because Asher didn't growl. He didn't roar. He simply moved. A flash of fur and momentum, low and fast. The kind of blur you don't see until your knees are already buckling. The gunman turned, too late. Asher struck, not teeth first, not with rage, but with intention. A blow to the inner thigh, off balance. The weapon clattered from the man's hand as he dropped. The girl screamed but wasn't touched. And before the man could recover, Asher was on his chest. His weight was exact front paws pressed into the man's shoulders, body angled so the gunman couldn't roll or breathe too deep without feeling pressure just below the collarbone. The shepherd's jaws hovered inches from the man's throat, open but not biting. Controlled. The gunman froze, lips trembling, eyes wide. Don't kill me!" Asher didn't blink, didn't move, didn't need to, because in that single frozen tableau, every person in the room understood this wasn't an animal, this was an operator, and the mission was complete. The little girl sat on the floor, shaking. Grant reached her first, pulling her into his arms. "I got you," he whispered, hand against the back of her head. "You're safe." She didn't answer, just buried her face into his shirt and cried, the silent, broken sob of a child who hadn't even had time to scream. The mother crawled over next, clutching them both, her hands shaking too hard to form words. Only when Grant nodded did Asher move. He stepped off the man with precise control, not glancing back. A veteran would have called it a clean disengage. The gunman didn't speak. He just lay there, arms sprawled, staring up at the ceiling fan as if it might rewind time. Asher returned to Grant's side and sat. No panting, no gloating, just a steady, measured breath. The police arrived 6 minutes later, and for the first time in his life, Grant didn't offer explanations. He simply said, "Review the footage." They did. By the time the second squad car pulled in, an officer approached with stunned eyes. "That dog, he didn't maul him. He disabled him." Grant nodded. "He knows the difference." The officer looked at Asher again. "Jesus." "He's seen worse," Grant said softly, laying a hand on Asher's flank. "But he still chooses restraint." Later in the truck, Grant stared out at the pink evening sky while Asher sat quietly beside him. His leg had a shallow scrape cleaned and dressed by a kind paramedic who muttered "goddamn hero" under her breath twice while taping the gauze. The engine hummed beneath them. Grant finally broke the silence. "You didn't even bark." Asher looked at him, one ear raised. No panic, no fury, just precision. The shepherd gave a soft exhale, then rested his chin on Grant's thigh. Grant blinked hard. "He was going to hurt her. And you," his voice caught, "you neutralized him like it was a drill." Asher closed his eyes, body warm against his leg. For a moment, Grant couldn't breathe, because years ago, in a country too far from forgiveness, he'd seen this same dog used like a weapon. But now he saw a protector, not just of lives, but of innocence, of second chances, of what it means to choose mercy over fear. They didn't drive off right away. They sat there, man and dog, watching the sky turn gold and lavender over the gas pumps and the red and white sign blinking, "Open," a place like any other. But a moment they'd never forget, because sometimes healing doesn't come with applause or medals. It comes in precision, in a choice not to destroy, but to protect. And Asher? He'd made that choice for them all. It began with a shaky cell phone clip, blurred but unmistakable. The image of a German shepherd leaping from a truck, moving through a sliding glass door without hesitation. The video cut just before contact, but it didn't matter. The still frame said enough: courage, mid-motion. By morning, the full security footage had aired on 3 major networks. And by noon, Asher's face was everywhere. Retired war dog foils hostage situation. The quietest hero in the room. He didn't bark. He acted. From abandon to angel, K9 Asher saves little girl. The headlines came in waves. Some told the story straight, others turned it poetic. But all of them echoed the same thing. He did it again. Not because someone told him to, not because it was in his training file or mission code, because it was who he was. Grant didn't want the attention. He didn't ask for interviews, didn't schedule press, but it didn't matter. The moment the girl's mother went on camera holding her daughter, eyes still red, everything shifted. "I saw him," she said, voice cracking. "He didn't lunge. He didn't bite. He just knew. He saved her, and he never once looked afraid. When asked about the man who stopped the bleeding afterward, she added, "He wasn't the hero. The dog was." That night, Grant sat alone on the porch, mug of cold coffee in hand. Asher lay at his feet, head resting over one paw, eyes watching the tree line as the last of the sun burned down. A red-orange smear lit up the clouds like a wound trying to heal. "You made the news again," Grant murmured, not looking down. "Bet you didn't think they'd use your photo twice in one lifetime." Asher didn't move, but Grant saw the ear twitch. "You're not a ghost anymore," he whispered. "You're not the headline of what they left behind." He leaned forward, set the mug on the wooden planks beside him. His hand reached out and rested gently against Asher's back, just below the scar. "Now you're proof that they come back, that they still have something to give." The next morning a package arrived. Plain cardboard, no return address. But inside Grant found a velvet box, and within that a medal, a real one, not for war, but for peace. A letter accompanied it, written on congressional stationery. To K-9 Asher, for bravery in defense of civilian life, for service beyond your assigned mission, and for reminding a nation what loyalty looks like. It was signed by a senator Grant had never met. He folded the letter slowly, his thumb pausing over the word reminding. Because that's what Asher was doing now, not making history, reclaiming it. Social media erupted. Such silent hero trended for 4 straight days. Veterans posted tributes. Children sent crayon drawings. One school in Virginia named their service dog training program the Asher Initiative. But what mattered most was this. No one talked about what was taken from him anymore. Now they talked about what he gave back. Not scars, but hope. Grant stepped into a hardware store 2 days later and was recognized. A clerk shook his hand and pointed to the TV overhead where Asher's still frame was frozen mid-leap. "That your dog?" Grant just nodded. The man blinked. "He didn't even bare his teeth. How'd he do that?" "He chose not to." "Why?" Grant looked away, then back. "Because he knows pain, and he still chose mercy." That night, the front door creaked open with the wind. Asher sat by the fireplace watching the flames. Grant, across the room, reread the letter again, this time slower, letting each word settle. He looked at Asher. "You weren't meant to survive that base, but you did. The shepherd didn't flinch, and you weren't supposed to get a second chapter, but here we are." He folded the letter and slid it beneath the medal's case. "You were always a hero. They just stopped looking." A few hours later, a journalist posted the final line of her op-ed. It went viral before sunrise. "Some heroes wear uniforms, some carry guns, and some walk back into the fire just to make sure no child gets burned." And under the photo, taken by a bystander outside the convenience store, Asher sat next to the little girl he'd saved, her tiny hand resting on his head, his eyes soft but alert. Not a weapon, not a victim, but a living testimony. The air in Washington was thick with ceremony. At the National War Dog Memorial, folding chairs faced a granite paw-shaped monument. Names etched in stone handlers and dogs stood for sacrifices too heavy to explain. Grant stepped to the podium in a borrowed suit. At his side sat Asher, groomed, harness polished, gaze steady. A veteran, a sentinel, still watching. "I wasn't trained for this," Grant began, "but I do know how to tell the truth." He gestured toward Asher. "This guy served 3 tours in Iraq. Found bombs, pulled men from rubble, but he didn't have a name. They called him Unit 117. When the war ended, we left him behind. A hush fell. I went back. Couldn't sleep knowing he was chained to a memory none of you ever saw. When Grant found him, Asher weighed 48 pounds. Wouldn't look at him, not because he forgot, because he didn't trust humans anymore. War didn't break him, Grant said. We did, and then softer. But love brought him back. The crowd didn't erupt. It breathed. A Marine muttered, "Hell of a dog." Later that night, a quote from the speech spread online. We broke him, but love brought him back. That moment sparked something. At home, Asher still sat by the window, gaze locked on the tree line, ears alert. Grant realized duty hadn't left him. That's when the name came, Asher's Watch, because duty doesn't end when war does. What started as a scribbled idea became a mission. Rescue retired K-9s. Pair them with veterans on the edge. Let healing go both ways. There was Shadow, a bomb-sniffing dog abandoned in Nevada. He found home with Vincent, a Marine suffering insomnia. I sleep now, Vincent wrote, because Shadow breathes beside me. Leia, a former customs dog with arthritis, was matched with Jasmine, an Air Force vet who hadn't left home in 8 months. Leia didn't ask questions. She just laid by the door. Until Jasmine opened it. No press campaigns, no polished slogans, just stories. Within a year, 12 pairings, then 27, then 50, a ranch donated space. A woman mailed hand-stitched vests. A child with cerebral palsy sent her allowance writing, "Tell Asher thank you for still believing in people." On the nonprofit's website, under each photo, "They served, now we serve them." When asked in an interview, why name it after Asher, Grant said, "Because when I gave up on myself, he didn't." Then came the call, grainy voicemail. "There's a place off Route 17. They're selling off the ones no one comes back for." Grant and Asher drove through the night. No task force, just a promise. The warehouse was rotting, silent. But Asher's ears lifted before the door even opened. Inside, crates, chains, blood-stained concrete. Fear soaked the air. 10 dogs, all German shepherds, all scarred. One lunged at the gate rage, teeth trauma. Grant stepped back. Asher stepped forward. No bark, no flinch, just presence. The dog froze, then sat. Not surrendered, recognized. Asher made a sound deep, ancient, a soldier's greeting. And the broken dog held his stare, didn't lunge again. Authorities came. 10 dogs rescued, but one refused to leave until Asher walked to the crate and waited. The shepherd entered voluntarily. His name became Bravo. 4 tours, declared unstable. Scheduled for euthanasia. Erased from records. Now, he had a second chance. That night, Grant watched Bravo patrol the ranch fence, head low, tail calm. Not nervous. Learning the sky again. Asher sat beside him. "You knew the second we walked in, didn't you?" Grant asked. Asher didn't answer, but his eyes never left the horizon. Still watching. Always. The barn was quiet. Only breathing filled the space. Not heavy, not rushed. Just steady inhales and exhales, human and canine, trying to sink. It wasn't emptiness. It was expectation. Grant stood silently, clipboard forgotten. 3 veterans. 3 dogs, no leashes, no commands, just presence. Lyle, 42 Army Ranger, arms crossed like armor, stood opposite Coda, a limping Belgian Malinois with a scar down his leg. They didn't move, until Coda tilted his head, curious. Lyle's arms dropped slightly. Coda stepped forward, sat, waited. Lyle extended his hand. Coda placed his chin in it. No words. Just trust. A few stalls down, Shay, 28, former Marine, sat on a hay bale, wrists hidden, grief heavy. Echo, a shepherd with half an ear, paced, anxious, hesitant. Shay whistled reflex from the field. Echo stopped, then slowly pressed her body sideways against his legs, not leaning in, just touching. His breath broke, and she exhaled too. They held the same invisible weight, but all eyes were on Colin. 53, Delta Force, silent since the incident, files redacted, 2 years without a word. Grant had doubts. His assigned dog, Blue, a recent rescue, entered Colin's stall, stood still, then calmly rested his head in Colin's lap. Colin's hands, stiff, unsure, finally moved. One stroke, then another. Shoulders began to shake. Tears fell. Blue didn't move, just stayed. That night, Grant sat beside Asher by the paddock fence. 3 for 3, he whispered. Across the field, Colin walked beside Blue. At one point, the man spoke. Grant couldn't hear the words, but Asher's ears twitched, and Blue's tail wagged. Once. It had started on a napkin. Grant, sleepless on the porch, scribbling, "Echo won't drink from metal bowls, ceramic only." Shay said, "Thank you today," his first words. He kept writing. Napkins became notebooks. Every dog got a journal. Blue slept by Colin's bed, no nightmares. Asher patrols every night, still on duty. By the month's end, he added stories, not data moments. Echo waits every morning outside Shay's door, doesn't bark, just waits. Colin gave Blue a tennis ball, said he used to have one like it. I didn't ask who. The journals piled up black moleskins labeled in silver ink. Grant placed them on the shelf. Sophie, a young volunteer, flipped through one and whispered, "This is beautiful." He didn't answer, just said, "We'll need more room." It became the Journal Project, a library of lives in healing. Handlers added their own notes. Max growled in his sleep. I placed a hand on his back. He stopped. So did I. Luna waits at 6 p.m. every day. No one comes. But she waits. Even Shay wrote, "Before Echo, silence was protection. Now I know it was a cage." She didn't unlock it. She just sat outside until I found the key. Grant read old entries often. Sometimes he smiled. Sometimes he closed the book and just breathed. But always he felt anchored, like it mattered. A reporter once asked for a story. He handed her Asher's journal. She read aloud. June 11th. Asher curled under my desk, dreamed again. I whispered, "You're home." He calmed. So did I. She looked up, eyes wet. "He's more than a dog." Grant nodded. "He's memory, in motion." That night, Grant opened a fresh journal. October 12th. Name, Valor. Rescued yesterday. Refuses to eat. Growls at door frames. Saddest eyes I've ever seen. But there's a flicker. If we're quiet and kind, we might see it catch fire. At midnight, Grant walked the sanctuary. A ritual now. No flashlight. He knew the way. This wasn't a shelter. It was a promise. He passed the dogs. Valor stirred in sleep, paw over a pink rubber duck, probably left by Colin. Luna curled near the radiator, Coda with his blanket dragged halfway out the crate. Blue snored loudly, now a sound of peace. At the gate, Ghost stood still, scanning the dark. Nova sat beside him, copying every breath. They hadn't been trained for night watch, but they came anyway. Inside, Shay's door was cracked open. Echo lay across the threshold, guarding. Farther down, Blue stirred beside Colin. No nightmares tonight. Every door guarded. In Grant's room, the bed was messy. Papers scattered, but what mattered was Asher, still curled at the foot, facing the door, still watching. But now, Grant realized he wasn't watching alone. Asher's tail tapped twice. "I see you." Outside, a dog barked once, short, sharp. Then silence. No alarm, just presence. Grant opened his journal. Sanctuary log. Night watch. Asher used to be the only one. Now there are 6. They choose the dark so others can rest. Not out of fear, but loyalty. Somewhere along the line, the mission didn't end, it just changed uniforms. He paused, then added, "The watch is growing." Outside, wind stirred the trees. Inside, Asher sighed in sleep, and under a spill of stars, the night watchers stood. It started small, a pause at the stairs. Asher, once graceful as a shadow, lifted his paw and hesitated. Grant noticed but said nothing. He simply waited, hand resting on the railing. Eventually, Asher moved, stiff but willing. Weeks later, the pause had become a limp. The vet called it degenerative myelopathy. Grant already knew the ending. He'd seen it in soldiers, in dogs, in himself. "You'll know when it's time," the vet had said. But Grant already knew it wasn't time yet, because Asher still responded to Bleib, stay. Not barked like in war days, but whispered soft, grounded in memory. Asher's ears twitched. He obeyed, not from fear, but from trust. Their walks shortened. No longer deserts or battlefields, just a loop around the sanctuary fence. When Asher sat to rest, Grant sat too. No commands, just presence. The other dogs sensed it. Echo nudged him gently. Ghost lay near. Even Blue brought a chew rope Asher no longer played with but acknowledged. Grant wrote everything down. 10:07. Responded to watch. 2:16. Tremor but still stood. Bleib equals full body stillness. Trust. Each note a stone on a path toward letting go. One stormy night, thunder echoed across the hills. Grant stepped outside. Asher was already on the porch legs, shaking but still standing guard. Grant stood beside him. Years ago, Asher had been the one to stand beside him, when war followed Grant home. Now, roles reversed. But the bond remained. Inside, Grant knelt by Asher's bed. "Bleib," he whispered, and Asher held. The next morning, a new shepherd arrived. No name, just a number, barely 2 years old, shivering, traumatized. Grant didn't approach. He let Asher go first. The old dog stood a few feet away from the pen, calm, grounded. The young one lunged halfway, teeth bared, then froze. Asher didn't flinch. He sat and waited. Minutes passed, then more. The young shepherd circled, watched, then, step by cautious step, came forward. He pressed his head, hesitant, trembling against Asher's shoulder. Not trust yet, but a beginning. Grant wrote one word in his journal. Leaned. because in this sanctuary, that was the first miracle. By afternoon, the young dog, still unnamed, watched from a distance, always checking if Asher was still there, still guarding, still holding the gate. And that night, the young one curled beside Asher's bed, not touching, but close enough to feel safe. At dawn, Grant stood on the porch with a thermos and 2 leashes. He didn't need them anymore, but the ritual mattered. Asher stepped out first. Then the younger shepherd. Grant had started calling him Ranger, but the dog hadn't decided if that fit yet. They walked a slow loop through the trees. At the lake, Ranger barked at his own reflection. Asher limped toward the water, took a drink, and watched with quiet amusement. Grant knelt beside him. "You've done enough," he told the old dog. "Time to teach, not to carry." Ranger approached, nose twitching, then sat beside them. Grant rested a hand on Asher's backbones, more visible now, but the strength still there. "He'll show you the way," Grant said to Ranger. "Everything I learned about staying alive, I learned from him." Asher sighed and leaned into Grant's leg. Memories surged of wars, of narrow escapes, of a bark that once saved Grant from a blast. Unseen medals, unspoken debt. Ranger nudged Asher's chin. The old dog responded in silence, touching noses, resting beside the pup. Grant's throat tightened. "Watch over him," he whispered, "like you watched over me." Asher's tail tapped the sand. Then he rested, muzzle toward the lake, eyes closed, but still listening. When Grant rose, Ranger rose too. Asher pushed himself up with care. The limp remained, but so did the duty. And as they walked backman, old sentinel, and the next in line, Grant felt it. A legacy not passed in fire, but in faith. Not shouted, but lived. Some legacies roar, others leave paw prints that never fade. Grant had never meant to write a book. Reports, yes, after-action memos, casualty logs, kennel evaluations. But a memoir? That felt indulgent. Then came the journal's black moleskins with coffee stains and paw prints, filled with quiet revelations of men and dogs relearning how to breathe. One rainy morning he found Asher's first entry. First tail wag in spite of pain. The ink had bled, but the meaning held. Something clicked. If one wag could change his world, maybe the whole story could change someone else's. He cleared space in the barn loft, dragged in a salvaged desk, and began. Longhand. He couldn't face a blinking cursor. He wrote backward through time. The first patrol in Mosul Asher, freezing mid-step, uncovering a buried IED inches from Grant's boot. Numb. The night Asher dragged a bleeding private to safety, teeth locked onto his flak vest. Hash, the rusted cage, the limp, the bowl of chicken and rice, the first bite, survival in real time, Hatted, Ranger leaning, echo waiting. Blue's laugh snore in the halls. He wrote the line that would outlive him. War didn't break him, we did. But love, steady, stubborn love, brought him back. 6 months later, the manuscript landed on an editor's desk in New York. A week after that, the phone rang. The publisher offered an advance Grant didn't believe was real. He kept just enough to fix the barn roof. The rest funded Asher's watch. The book was titled Stay, the story of a dog who refused to leave a soldier behind. They wanted Grant's name alone. He insisted Asher's appear too. Final cover, Grant Mallory with Canine Asher, the dog's paw print in silver foil beneath. Release day came like any other. Feedings, meds, broken water pipe. He forgot until Sophie burst across the yard, waving her phone. "Number 3 on Amazon," she shouted. That night, Grant finally looked. Reviews poured in. Veterans finishing it in one sitting, teachers assigning chapters, handlers thanking him for saying what they couldn't. A VA clinic in Ohio ordered 20 copies. Within weeks, they'd reordered 50 patients, kept accidentally taking them home. A dog training academy in Oregon made the book required reading. A school librarian in Kansas held read-alouds. Students wept openly and petitioned for therapy dogs. Social media lit up with #Stay Strong photos of rescues curled beside wheelchairs, therapy dogs under folding chairs, kids whispering, "Does the dog really forgive us?" Talk show invites followed. Grant declined most. The story didn't need a spotlight, just ears willing to listen. But when the VA invited him to keynote their mental health summit, he went. He stepped to the podium, Asher at heel, and read one paragraph. "This book isn't an ending. It's a baton. If these pages make you feel, do something with the feeling. Rescue. Volunteer. Listen. Stay." The room stood, not in applause but in silence, thick as grief, warm as reverence. Later, an elderly medic pressed 2 dog tags into his palm. "For him," he said, "he'll understand." Back home, letters, checks, and photos poured in. Grant built the stay wall every vet dog pair that wrote, "Your story saved ours." Asher moved slower now. But when visitors approached, he stood trembling but proud. Kids knelt, medics saluted. He answered with a tail thump. Every greeting was a new chapter being written. One evening, Grant saw Ranger curled beside Asher on the porch. A nervous trainee lingered nearby. Grant opened a fresh notebook and wrote, "The next story." Because legacy isn't a finish line. It's a relay handing forward, the weight and the wonder, one stitched together heart at a time. The plaza at Arlington had always felt eternal white columns and braced flags. But this October morning, something new stood beyond the statues, a curved limestone path leading to an alcove that hadn't existed a year ago. At the entrance, the forgotten canines, warriors who served, then waited to be remembered. Grant stood outside the rope, Asher resting at his heel. Ranger lingered nearby, eyes alert. A historian approached the podium, voice solemn. Nearly 5,000 military dogs deployed in 2 decades. Hundreds lost, many more forgotten. Then came the unveiling. 2 handlers pulled back the canvas. Gasps. The bronze statue stood life-size, captured mid-stride, strong legs, alert ears. But there were scars, too. A tremor in one knee, fur thinning, not a flawless monument, a survivor. Its eyes, cast in darker metal, glinted like amber. For a moment Grant smelled sand, heard rotor blades and Asher's bark echoing off blast walls. The plaque below read, "Asher. He never gave up." A senator spoke about budgets and new legislation. Grant barely heard. His eyes stayed on the statue's quiet certainty. Asher nudged his leg. Grant knelt beside him. "That's you," he whispered. "Told you they'd remember." The tail thumped once. Then Grant was called to speak. He left his notes folded and spoke from the heart, addressing the statue, the crowd, the unseen. "We build monuments to keep stories from drifting, but stone can't wag its tail or sit with you in the dark. What makes this sacred is not bronze. It's the promise we keep outside these gates, the promise to stay, He looked down at Asher. "This dog carried me when I couldn't carry myself. You've ensured no one forgets that. Not him, not any of them." He turned to Ranger, then to the new handlers. "And when the young ones take watch, remind them. Valor isn't the battle. It's the choice to heal after." He stepped back. The applause was soft but full. A Marine wheeled past, his service dog brushing Asher's shoulder. Visitors lined up to touch the statue, leave tokens, chew toys, patches, tags with only numbers. Children whispered the plaque's 6 words, committing them to memory. Grant waited until the line thinned, then guided Asher forward. Standing before the statue, he rested his hand on the cool bronze shoulder. "You kept watch," he said. "Now the world keeps watch over you." Asher lifted his muzzle, scenting something only he could feel, then leaned into Grant's leg, silent, certain. Above them, cast forever mid-stride, the bronze Asher faced the horizon, eyes trained on a future he'd never walk but had made possible. And at his pause, the real Asher closed his eyes, content at last to let others guard the gate. The lake behind the sanctuary still held the sky like a secret. Grant stood on the ridge above the field, cane in hand. His hair had silvered, his knee ached, but his eyes were steady. Ranger, no longer young, trotted the perimeter with 3 new recruits behind him, Jet, Moxie, and Olive. They mirrored his every move. Quiet, focused. Sophie's whistle split the air. Ranger halted, signaled. They dropped into sit-stays. Grant watched, heart swelling. He let memory blur the edges for a moment. Another shepherd, another haze, another promise. He tapped the cane twice. Ranger noticed, broke formation, trotted up. "Morning, Captain," Grant said, scratching his chin. Ranger chuffed, glancing back. "Hold the line." Grant smiled. "Still teaching, huh?" Ranger's eyes answered, "Always." They walked to the lake. The younger dogs splashed. Ranger corrected them with a bark. Grant chuckled. "Still your lake, old boy?" They reached the cottonwood. Grant sat. Ranger beside him, watching. Grant lifted his eyes to the sky, whispering, "Still watching, aren't you?" Silence answered, but it felt full, like paw steps just out of reach. He saw Asher, not the statue, the real one. Muzzle graying, eyes ablaze, the last dawn, the sigh, the tail thump, the fire to stay. Grant reached into his coat. A brass tag, Asher, 7AR114. He rubbed the smooth edges, then put it back. "Legacy's safe," he whispered. "You can rest." Ranger nudged him. Grant smiled. Rest is relative for watchmen. Sophie called, "Debrief starting." "Coming," he said, rising. Ranger rose too. Jet dropped a stick. Ranger carried it like a torch. The others followed. Grant turned back once toward the lake. The sun hit full glare, scattering light like diamonds. Wind rustled the cottonwood leaves. He felt it then, a certainty. Somewhere beyond the trees, beyond clouds and time, Asher's ears still twitched, listening, watching. Grant raised 2 fingers. "Watch well, partner." A gust answered, whirling leaves racing ahead like invisible paws. And as Grant followed toward Ranger and the new pack, the morning pulsed with that same unquenchable truth: the fire never dies. Every paw print in this story reminds us that compassion outlives conflict. From Asher, who carried courage long after his muscles failed, to each young recruit now guarding the dawn, every German shepherd here proves an animal's worth is measured not by battles won, but by hearts healed. Their loyalty teaches veterans to breathe again. Their quiet watch anchors children who once trembled at the dark. When we rescue a forgotten canine or offer a gentle hand to any stray soul, we're not just saving a life. We're lighting a chain of mercies that ripples through families, classrooms, and entire communities. So let Asher's legacy guide us. Choose empathy over neglect, presence over indifference, and action over apathy. Volunteer at a shelter. Sponsor a retired service dog. Teach the next generation that strength and kindness share the same spine. Because the greatest monuments aren't marble and bronze. They are the everyday moments when humans and animals stand beside each other and simply decide to stay. Carry that fire forward. Guard it with love, and watch the world grow gentler, one wag, one whisper, one second chance at a time.